The Zambia Law Development Commission is a statutory body established under an Act of Parliament. Administratively, we fall under the supervision of the Ministry of Justice. Our primary mandate is to undertake law reform. So we look at the statute book, review it, and make recommendations on what aspects of the statute book must be removed, what aspects are either archaic and no longer applicable to the Zambian public, or what aspects need to be reviewed, amended to meet the changing needs, to incorporate international and regional standards in specific and particular sectors. We also have a responsibility to conduct legal seminars and conferences on emerging legal issues and to translate legislation into local languages. We primarily carry out our work through research, and we are also required to undertake stakeholder consultations to ensure that whatever recommendations we make for law reform reflect the social and cultural values of the Zambian people, to ensure that the legislation is current, the legislation is applicable, and it is practical. So we were requested by the Gender Division, which was the Ministry of Gender then, to review the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act. There were calls from stakeholders for its review. Stakeholders felt that it was not adequately responding to the contemporary issues of gender-based violence. There were gaps in the legislation that stakeholders wanted addressed. One of the issues that arose in relation to the Act was the fact that the Act is drafted in such a manner that you do not have in our criminal legislation provisions that speak to acts of violence as criminal acts in themselves. They are attached to other existing offenses like assault, occasioning actual bodily harm, and other related offenses. That was one of the complaints of stakeholders. There were also complaints to do with the operationalization of the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Fund. The Act creates a fund that is supposed to help victims of violence, and that has been not operationalized. A few years ago, the Commission undertook a project to help the courts set up anti-gender-based violence courts. And these courts are courts that have been specifically installed with infrastructure that is intended to enhance the prosecution of gender-based violence cases and also ensure that victims of violence do not relive the incidents of violence, and they also do not have to face their perpetrators in court. So the courts were put up with structure for that particular challenge. One of the challenges again to the legislation was that it did not match up to this new court infrastructure. So those were some of the areas that we had to look into in terms of reviewing the Act recently. And this is the report that we handed over to the Gender Division a couple of months ago. Sexual harassment is not something that we specifically dealt with as an issue. It was considered in the general consideration of gender-based violence cases as a whole. As a specific issue, we did not specifically speak to the issue of sexual harassment. It is something that we actually want to go into looking at now, because we have noted that there are a number of gaps in legislation relating to issues and questions of sexual harassment. We've seen an increased number of, I don't know whether we want to call them incidents of sexual harassment or reports of sexual harassment, particularly in the workplace. In professional circles, we are seeing increasing incidents in higher institutions of learning, and it is affecting other rights of the people that are victims of sexual harassment. I think one of the key gaps in the legislation with sexual harassment is that the provision in the law is very limited. It was included there to protect children in school. So it doesn't necessarily cater for every situation of sexual harassment. I think that is the biggest gap. A number of institutions have got sexual harassment policies, but when it comes to how the disciplinary and HR systems treat sexual harassment, most victims end up being stigmatized. The way sexual cases were dealt with in the past, where women are stigmatized and it looks like it's your fault, you caused this harassment on yourself. And also, when we talk about gender-based violence, I think we mostly focus on the side of women, but men also suffer violence. And sexual harassment is one of those forms of gender-based violence that even men tend to suffer, but it's it's very quiet. Most of them will not talk about it. So we are hoping we can raise discussion around it. We can improve the legislation so that we can have sexual harassment in any situation dealt with accordingly, and human resource systems and disciplinary processes can also be accordingly adjusted. We are hoping that following our recommendations, the Gender Division is going to finalize the amendments of the Act with the Ministry of Justice, which is responsible for finalizing legislation, and they'll be presented to Parliament for consideration for enactment into legislation. And we do hope that there will be another opportunity if stakeholders feel there's still room to improve on the amendments, that they can, during the parliamentary sessions, make their submissions, and we can have a piece of legislation that creates a framework that is a little bit stronger. We are also hoping that one of the next steps is also going to be to look at the administrative gaps in administration of the legislation and see if the social, economic and cultural issues can also be addressed. I think we're ending 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and as I indicated earlier, as a commission, our contribution is to have a discussion on questions and issues of sexual harassment. That is something we are hoping that coming into 2024, it is a discussion we can take a little bit further, and we can see some improvement within systems, within institutions, within higher places of learning as well. We can see changes to some of the mechanisms, HR systems, disciplinary systems, and even the legislation itself, and just enhance the legal framework and protection of victims of violence.
Unite, invest to prevent violence against women and girls. Gender-based violence arises from socially constructed roles leading to inequalities and abuse. In 2011, Zambia took a crucial step in addressing the pervasive issue of gender-based violence by enacting the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act No. 1 of 2011. This act was designed to combat systematic violence stemming from gender norms and rules and provide protection, support, and justice to the public, especially the vulnerable groupings in society. However, in 2017, due to the increasing cases of gender-based violence in the country and concerns raised by stakeholders on the need to enhance the enforcement of the provisions of the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act, the Ministry of Gender, as it was then, engaged the Zambia Law Development Commission to review the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act. One of the key concerns from the stakeholder engagement concluded during the review of the Act was in relation to sexual harassment. In Zambia, like many other places, people, especially women, suffer abuse due to their gender, impacting their lives and well-being. In 2023, the Zambia Law Development Commission handed over a research report on the review of the Anti-Gender-Based Violence Act to the Gender Division under Cabinet Office. We sat down with a victim of sexual harassment in the workplace. For purposes of this presentation, her identity has been hidden.
Twalebomba fye bwino bwino po twambire. Chelo nalefika 7 hours ninkirina bwino. But elio bachinjire ba director kwa isaba aume. Kifintu fya isamba okuchinja. Yonse chelo ninkirina bwino. Nomba ba director beso abaume aba Mr. T ba Mr. Paul. Pa first elio banje bele ati no shikirinire bwino mu office mwabo. So na ile nakirina fye bwino emobali na bekala. Elo bambire okulanda efintu patuli musuma sana wafuma kwisa patefe balendolesha nalisati nako okufuminapo balenjita everyday akachero balendandi chefine balendandi. So one day elo baisanje bati nalikwata omusana obusuma ati musana wandi usuma sana. So shaishi befya kubeba naranje fya ati thank you. Elio nshita yaisa pita bali isanjikata ko kwino kumusana shaishi bono wakweba bantu bali ma boss bandero nchito na lei fwaisa sana okulanda fefshin kata pale fena chitire nali yesheraho kuba kitavoid but balisa akosererapo ine naliupwa so nalisa alekafya enchito pantu kuti nalufyanya ero abalume banditeti basekeremu so nalisa nafuma kofye kunchito shabebere nokubeba tinindeka so shaishbenefya.
A gender activist popularly known as Sister D gave her stance on the rising problem of sexual harassment.
In my understanding, I would define sexual harassment as somebody pestering you to give them a sexual favor. You know, maybe somebody is looking for a job and where they go, the employer will tell them, I mean, you need to sleep with me, you need to have sex with me, then you can have the job. And you find that most of the time, sometimes women are not ready to do that, but they are being harassed, you know, into sexual favors. So that's my understanding. In my understanding as an artist, as a woman, there are a lot of forms of sexual harassment, you know, employers harassing employees, even the other way around, you know, housemaids, you know, on the street, you know, sometimes even just in the streets, when you're moving in the streets, a guy will just pull you because you're a girl and they'll just pull you and harass you, you know, because they think you're not as powerful as they are, so they can find their own way, you know, to harass you and do whatever they want with you. So in every situation, in every institution, in all the environments I've been in, I think I've seen a number of sexual harassment to women. So for me, I think it's everywhere. It's everywhere. I wouldn't say this is a particular place where you find sexual harassment. I think it's everywhere. Responsibilities arise, I think, I would say that belongs to each and every one of us. You know, let's look, for example, in our homes. What are we telling our children? What responsibilities are we having as parents when we talk to our children? You know, in schools, what are we doing? So there are a number of issues that we need to look at when we are looking at preventing sexual harassment. And people need to be informed, people need to be enlightened, and when they see certain things you know, happening to them, they should report to the relevant authorities.
Law enforcement agencies are a key stakeholder in ensuring that gender-based violence cases are curbed. We caught up with the Zambia Police spokesperson, Mr. Hamonga, who gave the position of the Zambia Police in the fight against sexual harassment in professional spaces.
According to the Gender Equity and Equality Act number 22 of 2015, sexual harassment simply means a conduct or contact of a sexual nature, such as the following, like as having physical contact, making advances, comments, or insinuations without the consent of a person. It can also mean being offensive, humiliating, and intimidating in nature to a person in a suggestive manner. So that is what we talk about sexual harassment. It also further goes to be defined as threatening or imposing a condition on a person for doing or undertaking anything or creating. Okay, the common manifestation of sexual harassment that as an institution we are aware of are in the form of the following. It will be either be physical contact or sexual advance without the consent of the other person. And we also have what we may call stalking during a proposal and when the relationship is coming to an end. And also we have the other one of imposing a condition on a person for doing or undertaking anything for an employee or a person that is being supervised. So those are the three forms of manifestations that we as Zambia Police Service have been handling. The responsibilities that arise as in preventing sexual harassment are quite many. They are about, I'll just maybe highlight 5 of them. That is, one is the provision of accurate information and education to members of the public so that they can make informed decisions. Okay, and we have also protection of the victims of sexual harassment. As an institution, we need to protect these victims so that they cannot be harassed any longer or anymore. And also counseling of the victims of sexual harassment. It's a responsibility as a police service that will ensure that these victims are counseled so they can go back to their normal lives. And we have also, of course, what is very paramount is arresting the perpetrators of sexual harassment. And also the last item or thing I would like to bring to the fore is making referrals to institutions that are providing other services that the victim support unit or the Zambia Police Service may not have, or within the mandate of the Zambia Police Service to do.